Enough baby clothes, my mother-in-law scowled as cops swarmed my car hours after birth. A body in the trunk, my husband missing, their secret killed me. It was a calm, snowy afternoon in February when I was sitting peacefully, knitting in the living room. That pale pink yarn I hadn't used much yet was moving softly over my pregnant stomach. With only a week remaining until my baby was expected, I was close to completing the miniature socks I was making for my eagerly anticipated child. Our 5-year-old, 2-story home really stood out, even in the fancy Minneapolis suburbs. Its outside walls were white, with dark green shutters and a very well-kept front yard. Everything seemed flawless, a world I never would have pictured when I worked as a nurse. "Bait, knitting again? Don't you have enough baby clothes already?" The sudden voice made my hands stop. I turned and saw my mother-in-law, Victoria, standing there with a homemade apple pie. We kept up the custom of eating dinner together 3 times each week since we moved into this place 5 years before. "Hello, Mother." "But I still think we need more," I said with a gentle smile. My mother-in-law was a dominant person in the local social scene, known by everyone of importance. On the outside, she was very affectionate with me and had even given us the down payment for the house. Every connection in the neighborhood came from her, and weekend tea parties and charity events were becoming requirements. I often privately felt uneasy about Victoria's overbearing ways. "James is working late once more," Victoria questioned while gazing out the window. My son, who heads a department at a large life insurance firm, pulled in a substantial income, exceeding $300,000 annually. While everyone in the neighborhood thought he was the perfect spouse, his job had kept him working later than usual lately. Particularly over the last 3 months, he's been arriving home late 3 evenings each week, allegedly to train new hires. "It does seem like a new initiative has begun, doesn't it?" I responded somewhat vaguely. I had finally conceived 2 years prior after undergoing fertility treatments. Because I used to be a pediatric nurse, I grasped the value of life more deeply than most. My nurturing disposition and emphasis on family had earned me the confidence of those around me. Nevertheless, an undefined apprehension was steadily growing within me. My husband's recent conduct appeared somehow unsettling. There were suspicious phone calls late at night. I noticed the abrupt way he'd shut his laptop screen. Also, last week, I randomly found a handkerchief with an unfamiliar fragrance on it, yet I pushed those worries away. Maybe I was simply becoming overly sensitive since I was pregnant. On the living room shelf sat our wedding portrait. It featured the young, happy couple from 5 years ago. I was smiling radiantly in James's arms. Nearby was a family picture taken last Christmas, displaying the 3 of us together with Victoria. Everything appeared flawless. Though perhaps appearances can be deceiving, I thought. The baby is definitely going to be a precious girl. I thought Victoria was changing the topic. Outside, the snow was coming down even harder. It felt like this brutal winter in the Minneapolis suburbs was far from being over. The morning light was pouring into the maternity ward at Mayo Clinic. The scene from my hospital room window was a landscape of silver and white. The snow, which began to fall last night, was still falling gently. Winter in Minnesota was still in its full grip. Here I was, Elizabeth, in bed, holding my new daughter, Grace. She was such a tiny little thing, just 6 pounds. 3 days had flown by since the C-section, and I was finally able to go home this morning. We were both doing fine. "Good morning, Grace," I whispered. My baby, all bundled up in soft baby clothes, was asleep, her lips moving slightly. Though the baby arrived a week before the due date, I was so relieved that there weren't any significant problems. My heart felt so full of love, thinking about our new life together. It was 7 in the morning. There was a knock on the door, and Sarah, the nurse who was taking care of me, came in. "Good morning, Mrs. Anderson," she said. "Are you all set to go home?" "Yes, almost everything's packed," I replied. "My husband is coming to get us in about half an hour." Just then, I heard some noise in the hallway. Sarah's face twisted a little and she went over to the window. She looked down at the parking lot and her expression changed to one of concern. Mrs. Anderson," she said. "Could you just wait a minute?" Her voice faded. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me and I reached for the window myself, but Sarah quickly put her hand up to stop me. "Hold on," she said. "I'll go check." Once the nurse left the room, the hallway grew noticeably louder. I heard the voices of fellow patients and the nurses going about their business. I could make out some of the voices of the other patients as well. From somewhere far off, I could also hear the distant wail of sirens. About 10 minutes passed, and then there was a knock at the door. This time it was Dr. Carter, my doctor. He seemed to be a little more serious than usual. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, "could we maybe delay your discharge just a little while longer?" "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Don't be concerned," he replied. "It's just that the police—" But his words were cut off by a sudden disturbance in the hallway. I slowly got to my feet, still holding my baby close. "Did something happen to my car?" I asked, a growing sense of dread creeping in. Dr. Carter didn't say anything. Instead, he took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "The police officers will be here to talk," he finally said. Just then the door to the room was flung open. Two detectives walked in. One was an older gentleman with gray hair, probably in his 50s. The other one was a younger woman, maybe in her early 30s. Both of them had very serious looks on their faces. "Mrs. Anderson," the older detective said, "we need to speak with you." He then showed me his police badge. It read Detective Murphy, Minneapolis Police Homicide Division. When I read that, I started to shake just a little bit. "We'll have a nurse care for the baby," the female detective said, her tone gentle but firm. I gave the nurse grace because I didn't have it in me to object. Now it's time to head out to the parking area. During the elevator ride, nobody said a word. When we got to the ground floor lobby, it was more packed than usual. I saw hospital employees, police officers, and what looked like a few reporters. I could feel everyone's gaze on me. As the automatic doors slid open, the chilly wind bit at my face. I pulled my coat's collar up higher. In the parking lot, there were several patrol cars, and my car was in a restricted area marked with yellow tape. The pristine white snow was illuminated by the sinister red emergency lights. The driver's side window was completely broken, and 6 uniformed officers were standing around the car. They were all staring at me. "Ma'am, please stay away from the car," one officer shouted, but I was already walking toward it. "Why, what happened to My voice faded away. The trunk was open, and a disgusting smell was coming from it. The young woman detective quickly took hold of my arm. "Mrs. Anderson, please stay back." But it was too late. I had already seen what was inside the trunk, a black plastic bag, reddish-brown stains that were thinned by the melting snow, and just barely visible from the bag a human hand. I couldn't even cry out. All of my energy left my body. Just before I passed out, a memory flickered into my mind. It was 3 nights ago. I recalled the sound of the trunk slamming shut when my husband came home. The strange smell of that cologne lingered after his shower. Within the interrogation room at the Minneapolis police station, I held a paper coffee cup tightly. The coffee, which ought to have been warm, was now icy. "Let me just ask this again." Detective Murphy gestured toward a photo lying on the table. It depicted a woman's body, partially visible from a black plastic bag. "Do you recognize this individual, Amy Mitchell, a new hire at my husband's business?" I shook my head. But even as I did so, I wasn't entirely sure. Yes, it was like I had seen her face somewhere before. Detective Morris showed some surveillance footage. The Mayo Clinic parking area, the monitor showed my car, and there was a person moving around it. "You were supposed to be asleep in your hospital room at that point, so what's the deal with your car? I honestly don't know." My voice was shaky. The hospital's records of who entered and left actually supported my story completely. It would have been impossible for me to leave my room late at night after having a C-section. "Then what is your take on this?" Murphy handed me a printed document. It was a threatening email sent to Amy Mitchell's email address. The sender was listed as Elizabeth Anderson, which is me. "Stay away from my husband." Or what? That's not accurate. I swear I never sent that email. Upon hearing my denial, the detectives shared a look with each other without saying a word. Outside of the interrogation room, the tech guys were looking at my phone. And then, at 10:30 in the morning, everything just shifted. "Mrs. Anderson, I truly appreciate your understanding." A new detective stepped into the room carrying a USB drive with them. The drive had been discovered in Amy's place. We discovered some intriguing information on this flash drive. The monitor showed financial documents. James Anderson's name appeared. There were several secret accounts, and a substantial amount of debt was documented. The figure read $5 million. Seeing those digits, various recollections began to surface in Elizabeth's thoughts. Her husband's absences during the night, the diminishing balances in their accounts, and how the life insurance policies had unexpectedly been expanded recently. It was all related, though not as she had hoped, not at all. "Mrs. Anderson, do you have any idea where your husband is currently?" It took a moment or two for the meaning of that question to fully sink in. James Anderson, he was meant to come and get his wife from the hospital this morning, but he never did. They also couldn't get a hold of him at the company. The digital forensics have been analyzed and processed. A specialist in technology presented a new report, the IP address for the threatening emails, also how the email client was configured. Everything had been skillfully masked. However, the evidence clearly indicated one truth. Those emails were sent directly from your house. The air seemed thick, almost suffocating, within the interrogation room. Outside the window, the snow had started to fall once more. Detective Morris burst into the room quickly. She had a medical record in her grasp. Amy Mitchell's last hospital visit, 6 months pregnant. The father's identity wasn't noted, but all the witness statements pointed toward a single suspect. I sighed very deeply. "Truthfully, we think that your husband and she were having an affair." My connection with her had dissolved completely. Amy was promising to expose everything to the public. Concurrently, my husband was deeply in debt. The world seemed to blur before my eyes. It felt like a bad dream, yet there was no doubt this was happening. Mrs. Anderson, how do you account for this? Sitting there on the desk was a life insurance policy. The person named to receive the money had just been changed. It went from being for me, Elizabeth Anderson, to Victoria Anderson. Suddenly, the door of the interrogation room swung wide. A young cop came rushing in. Victoria Anderson. She'd come to the police station of her own accord, and she had some things to tell them. My mother-in-law had seen how her son was behaving differently. He had racked up huge gambling losses at casinos, plus some illegal fundraising activities, and he was involved with several women. She knew all about it, but she had kept quiet. However, it seemed that her silence was about to end. Detective Morris brought out some new evidence. Footage from a hidden camera was found in Amy's apartment. It showed James Anderson. He was planning what he thought would be the perfect crime. At that point, another officer burst into the room. They had seen James Anderson at the airport. The energy in the interrogation room shifted immediately. And at that point, everything started to become clear. The Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, where all the truth was heading. Amid the radio chatter, the airport police and the investigation team sprang into action. A few passengers stood nervously in the terminal so late at night. On a bench near the boarding gate sat a man. James Anderson intended to get on a plane to Dubai. His passport was fake. I held $500,000 in actual money. It looked like the ultimate way to get away. I just didn't think about a crucial detail. The cops had put together one last sting operation, using Victoria to help them. Mom, why? James's face twisted in pain. The words that I spoke when they finally arrested me suggested what the whole story was. At that exact same time, over at the clinic's mailroom, Elizabeth was at the nursery, looking at Grace while she slept. Nurse Sarah touched her on the shoulder lightly. Little Bobbies need their mom to love them. Those words slowly started to soften my stone-cold heart. Inside the police station's interrogation room, I started to tell the whole story. The detective seemed shocked after hearing what I said. It all started 2 years before now. Big gambling debts at casinos, taking money that wasn't mine. And then I met Amy, the new person at work. I was always having affairs, but Amy was different. She was having my baby, a baby that was 6 months old. This coincided with the time that Elizabeth was having trouble getting pregnant. The insurance scam was planned from the very start. Many different life insurance policies, changing who would get the money if I died. It was all meant to get rid of the $5 million debt, and there was another person helping me. Amy was also involved. A really surprising truth came to light. Amy and I planned to share the money from the insurance. The phony, threatening emails. They gathered proof to make it look like Elizabeth was behind it all, but the whole thing went sideways. Amy wanted to call off our agreement. My feelings about Amy definitely shifted as her pregnancy advanced. She started issuing threats, claiming she'd spill all our secrets and she wanted more cash. Our final conversation happened in the Mayo Clinic parking area. She declared that she would destroy everything I held dear. Things got out of hand really fast. The scarf around Amy's throat, it happened so quickly. Then I totally freaked out. To get rid of the incriminating things, he utilized Elizabeth's car's storage compartment. The hospital parking garage should have given his wife an airtight excuse, but he neglected one small detail. Mike Johnson, the guy who cleaned the hospital, he saw all the shady stuff happening after hours, and the glove that was in the camera's blind spot turned out to be incredibly important. More and more clues kept turning up. They found a secret camera in Amy's apartment. It turned out she'd put it there herself. Every single chat and plan was recorded. And mixed in with the recordings was some totally surprising video. The video showed James and Amy already together. It was 5 years back behind the scenes when his happy wife was wearing her wedding dress. Victoria Anderson's story was even more astounding. I knew every single thing, her son's wrecked life, the affairs, the money problems. She'd known all along and said nothing, because after all, I was an accomplice too. She was mixed up in the insurance fraud scam. The change of beneficiary served as solid evidence, but murder wasn't supposed to be part of the equation. Later, in a room at the Mayo Clinic, Elizabeth held her baby daughter close. "I'm so sorry, Grace." Tears streamed down her face. These tears weren't because I felt hopeless. No, they were tears. It was a fresh start once I'd come to terms with and embraced everything. A year later, I was busy rushing around in my crisp white coat in the children's ward at Mayo Clinic. I'd gone back to nursing half a year ago. It was the same hospital where Grace was born, the place where my whole world had been turned upside down. Now I was moving forward on a new journey. "Happy first birthday, Dr. Anderson." I softly smiled at the greeting from my coworker. Today was Grace's first birthday. I was going to pick her up from daycare after my shift. "Thank you." It was such a momentous day. It was more significant than just a birthday celebration. The sentence for James I. Anderson would be announced at the Hennepin County Courthouse today. The sentence was solemnly read aloud. The courtroom was packed with people who were involved in the case. Amy Mitchell's parents were sitting in the front row. A year ago, they'd been consumed by grief and fury, but now their faces conveyed a sense of acceptance. "We want to do whatever we can for Amy." Mrs. Mitchell described the scholarship fund they'd created the previous year. The fund was designed to help support young women who were struggling financially. Even though their daughter was gone, they refused to allow her death to be meaningless. In the back, Victoria Anderson sat quietly. Although she was charged as an accessory, her sentence was suspended because she had fully cooperated with the investigation. "I'll devote my life to making up for what happened." Since she cut ties with everyone, she gives her time to help people who have been hurt by domestic violence. She also got to care for Grace on weekends. "My mother-in-law is really different now," Elizabeth said softly. Over the last year, she understood that hate solves nothing. Once the court case ended, Elizabeth went to her new place. She'd moved from the big house and now had a smaller one. Still, this place felt so inviting. Grace, straight from daycare, ran to her smiling. She walked really steadily, even for someone so little. Even the doctors were shocked by how well she was doing. "Happy birthday, my darling." In the living room, there was a cake someone made. The light from the candles gave the room a soft glow. A new family was there around the cake. Elizabeth's parents and also Amy's parents had been asked to come. "We decided to be Grace's grandparents in name only," Mrs. Mitchell said. To put an end to the cycle of hate, the two families had chosen to make peace. "It's what we're doing now." Elizabeth took out a pamphlet. "Breaking the Silence, an organization to support those dealing with domestic violence and financial problems." She wanted to take what she'd learned and help people who were struggling in similar circumstances. "What we're doing is already getting noticed." Because of what happened, the insurance companies had made it more strict to review contracts. Plus, those hotlines for domestic violence became mandatory. The news outlets had also stopped their dramatic coverage and were instead analyzing the legal proceedings. When nighttime arrived, once Grace was asleep, I kept working in my office at home. The walls were covered with different pictures. These included hospital Christmas celebrations, the support group attendees, and photos that showed Grace's development. My life was certainly progressing. A diary was on my desk. It was addressed, "Dear Grace." It contained everything, the real story. Because one day, when my daughter gets older, she'll want to learn about this whole situation. But now wasn't the right moment for that yet. Snow had started to fall again outside the window. However, this winter felt different than the last one. Despite the bitter cold, there was a clear feeling of spring just around the corner. I picked up a photograph from my desk. It was one of Grace and me right after she was born. It was a photo taken right before everything was turned upside down that morning. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, smiling softly. Another new day was beginning tomorrow. Each day was full of fresh optimism. The clock indicated it was 11 o'clock at night. I could hear Grace breathing from the room next door. I wrote one last entry in my diary. It was addressed to my precious daughter. Life at times presents us with some harsh realities, but if you're brave enough to confront and conquer those truths, a new road will definitely appear. You yourself are that hope. The snow that had accumulated in the Mayo Clinic parking lot was completely gone now. Families were there celebrating the arrival of new Bobbies. Sometimes, the unvarnished facts of reality hit me hard. Nevertheless, I've learned that having the guts to face those truths and keep moving forward gives me the strength to build a new life. The story of Elizabeth Anderson showed me that kind of optimism in action.